Well, Ken, let me just roll in by just saying, firstly, thank you so much for agreeing to join us for an episode of the Responsible Edge today. It's an absolute it's a great thing for us to have snaffled you on for a show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Top man. Ken, as you know, we kind of start each new show introducing our listeners to you and getting to know you and your background. Obviously, I don't think 20 minutes is going to be nearly enough in order to cover all the things that you've done. But I think as we sort of go through your history, what I'm really keen to do is just to pull out those key moments, those key inspiration points, if you like, regarding what drew you to, a passion for ethical, responsible, and sustainable business practice. So if you wouldn't mind just taking us back, some people start very, very early on with the kind of initial inspirations as they were growing up, perhaps, or perhaps a little later, but just start wherever you like and just give us a flavor of you.
Yeah, no problem. I won't go all the way back. If we go back 12, 14 years, I was a corporate person. So I used to work in brand marketing. I worked at Anthesis Group, the big global brewer. And in all honesty, I think if you'd have asked me 14 years ago how were things, I would have said, it's fine. I've got a senior job. I was a brand director of quite a few big beer brands. I did an international job where I oversaw our digital strategy across Western Europe. I was traveling, I don't know, company car share schemes, the lot. And I was quite comfortable, if I'm honest with you. And I was okay in my skin and things were fine. And I was appreciative of what I had. And if you'd have said, where will you be in 12, 14 years, 2024, I would have said most likely still in AB InBev at a different role, maybe somewhere else within the company. However, what happened in 2013 was I was coming back from Leuven in Brussels, where the European head office was. And it was a Thursday night, and I read a magazine in the Eurostar, which I don't usually do. And it had a double-page spread, I believe, from memory, on the startup scene in London, in Shoreditch at the time. And it just got me. It was one of those articles I read, I got something from, and I thought I need to meet some startups. And the first thing was it was quite difficult to find startups. You don't just turn up at Old Street Roundabout in Shoreditch and there's startups there with. But when I met some startups, I realized very, very quickly that they're a different breed. They're very, very positive, vibrant, forward-thinking, optimistic, just full of energy. And the energy that I realized then I didn't have anymore, really, looking back at myself. Then I was kind of a corporate person going from one week to the other. And luckily, and it is a sliding doors moment, luckily, the startups I met had some really good technologies, which I thought we could definitely use with some of our brands within AB. So I endeavored to try and bring some of the startups into the company to meet some of the brand people that I knew to see if we can do some pilots. And through no one's fault, it just didn't work. I think there was different cultures, different expectations, timings, pressure, budgets, you name it. And it was quite a long slog, but I've got this kind of passion of these two should meet.
Okay, can I just, sorry, before you get into that, I'm just intrigued. Can you give us a flavor of what the technologies were that you were looking at? Just
a long time ago, but there were technologies there that you could put onto websites to make websites come to life more. This is like when websites were there, well, they still are now, but they're just coming more to fruition then. It's about websites. There was stuff to do with how to make really compelling content much faster than traditional ways of the time. And there's just other great, really clever research and data technologies being built. And I just thought, with my brand head on, I thought, God, we could do with this. And so yeah, it was very difficult. It was one of those labor of loves where I spent 6 months trying to bring these new breed of people in, and it didn't quite work. And I then had a moment of madness, inspiration, maybe both, where I decided to give it a go. But the only way it's going to work is if I give it a go on my own. So I left the corporate world, jumped the corporate ship back in January 2014, 10 years ago now, and decided to do it on my own, which looking back now was a bit of a jump, because what I was looking to do was get briefs from the corporate world. So my first brief, I think, was from Honda. And I had to go and find startups for them to help them with their brief. And I didn't know any startups, to be honest with you, apart from the 2 or 3 that I'd met. So I had to go out and meet people, to meet other people, to get a network of startups together. And I think this was through an agency, Honda were their client. And I was under pressure to do this. And it made me meet a lot of people, get to know some startups quickly, and try and pull this together. But over time, I met more people. I started mentoring startups. and it was easier to have options for every client corporate brief I got. So roll forward, I did that on my own for 2 or 3 years. I then formed a company called Progressive with a good friend of mine, Matt Nichols, and we formed like a boutique innovation agency. Matt did more of the strategy stuff. I did more of the pulling together the startups and the corporates. And that was great. Roll forward, and then last October, Progressive were acquired by Anthesis Group, who are a sustainability consultancy. So I now work 2 days a week for Anthesis, and then the other 3 days a week, I play more into my passion of mentoring startups. I've written a book called Startup Lexicon, public speaking, etc., etc. So I'm kind of have a portfolio career now, but everything I do, be it on my own or within Anthesis, has always got a connection with the startup world. So at Anthesis, I'm the director of startup ecosystem. So everything I do has got this thread of startups. But my experience over the last 10 years or so has been trying to join the two corporate and startup cultures together and get them to work together. And that's it.
Ken, I knowing you and knowing you provided that in such a succinct manner. There's so much to unpick there, but I want to take you back and go to that moment in 2014 when you made the decision to step out on your own and begin to kind of, I guess, work in that kind of matchmaking, operation that you sort of started. Like, what was that experience like? I mean, you said it was a big jump. Like, what was it like going from the corporate world to suddenly working? Were you literally on your own at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think I always say, and looking back now, the question is if the opportunity came up now, and I was at AB InBev still, and the opportunity came up now, I don't think I would have taken it.
Interesting. Okay.
I think then the moment was right. I didn't realize I was looking for something else, really. Something came up, an opportunity came up, and I thought, let's do it. Looking back now in retrospect, part of me does think, God, I must have been mad, because I had a young family, we had savings, but I still had to bring money in from the word go with the new venture. I just think the moment caught me. And I think as you get older, you can sometimes get a little bit more safe. And I'd like to think I could still do it now, but I wonder, I think I'd think over it more now. So it was a great moment, and I would recommend people taking the jump, but I think it was a moment in time where it felt right, and I did it. And as time's gone on, I'm really glad I did it. It was the best thing I've ever done. But I do look back now and think, God, that was a big step. I didn't realize it at the time.
It's that notion of stars aligning. It seems it was the right moment in your career. It was the right moment in terms of the stimulation or the encouragement from your corporate experience, and the opportunity arose and presented itself. It seemed to all come together.
It did, and it's absolutely refreshing. I have this weird analogy of, if you think of, and I'm nothing against people in the corporate world, but from my own experience in the corporate world, being in the corporate world is like being on the motorway, about a 10-lane motorway. Everyone's piling down it, trying to overtake, trying to get ahead of other people. And that's part of it. And it's part of the fun. There's a thrill. And if you're in a bigger car than someone else or a bigger job or whatever, some people get something from that. When you start your own business, it's like pulling off on a side road, of a slip road, into a walled garden where it's all quiet. You can hear the distant hum of the motorway, and you're on your own. And some people, that on their own scares them silly. They think, oh my God, I don't know what to do. This feels really scary. I'm going to go back on the motorway. But I love the safety of that noise.
Mm-hmm.
I found it quite refreshing, that silence of, right, I am on my own now. How am I going to do this? And I think that putting myself in that corner or in that garden, in a way, I felt really helped me. It was like a catalyst for me to go on to build the business on my own initially. So I got a lot from that piece. I thought, my goodness, life is a bit slower than I thought. I can actually think about me for once. I can actually think, what do I want to do now? And it was quite refreshing and comforting to hear the noise so far away rather than being in the car. And that's an analogy I haven't used for some time. I did when I first started. It felt like that. That was how I saw it. And I think that's, for some people it works, for some people it doesn't. But for me, it was really refreshing to actually get away from the noise and be in control and have a blank sheet of paper, which is scary, but I like that.
And to pull on I love the analogy of the motorway and pulling off into the walled garden. Is there a notion that allowed you to really set the direction of travel? I mean, again, the motorway analogy, you're sat on the motorway, there's only one way you're headed. You were sat in that walled garden deciding, right, where am I taking this? Was that sort of part of the thrill, if you like, of now being able to set the direction too?
Yeah, I think the other thing is, and again, this sounds very almighty of me saying it, but I think you have to know yourself as well. And I know a lot of people who work in the corporate world want to start their own business, and for sometimes all the right reasons don't quite do it, or they dabble with the new idea, but they still do their day job. I knew that I couldn't do that. If I was trying to launch Tech to Brand, as it was called, my first business, while still working at AB InBev, I'd still be working on it now, and I'd still be at AB InBev. So I had to give 6 months notice at AB InBev. So I went to my boss and gave my notice in, having only had a kernel of an idea when I gave my notice in. And I knew that I said I want to work my full 6 months. So over those 6 months, it was July the 1st to the end of December. So I knew I'd start my new company on the 1st of January 2014, which was quite a good time to start. I knew that give me 6 months and put me in a corner under pressure to go out, meet people and say, well, I'm doing this. So I think if I'm fair, before I gave my notice in, one good friend of mine said it sounds like a good idea, and that's all I needed. But I put myself in a corner, so I knew that by the end of the year, when I'm leaving, I'd have to have a first customer. So when I start, I'm ready. And I think most likely I did know that if it didn't work out, I could have gone back to my boss, hopefully, and said, look, it's not worked out. Can you give me another job? And I'd be confident I'd have got one. So it was a bit of a safety net that I didn't want to think about, but maybe subconsciously I knew it was there. But my point is, I knew by the time it first came, it was a big step and it was me taking a risk, but I put myself in the corner from 6 months beforehand to make sure that risk was lowered. So the 1st of January, I had something to move with.
And that was the Honda opportunity that you were working on.
I worked with an agency who had clients, one of which was Honda, and that was the first one. I think it's Honda that I went out and found some startups for. But that was a client. So the client, the agency, that was my first customer that I got while I was serving my time at AB InBev. So while I was doing my day job, I was still trying to get the new business going and talk to potential clients.
Interesting, very interesting. And I have to say, it's fascinating delving into this period, if you like, and understanding your decision making. You mentioned that you had obviously had the previous experience of trying to introduce startups within the corporate environment that you were in previously, but that I think you described it as there was just a misalignment in terms of culture, etc. Like, what was it about the learnings from that experience that you were then clear on in terms of how you were going to approach things when you went in this new direction?
Yes, it's a good question. I think what I did, looking back now, I think what I didn't have at the time was actually time. So I was hoping the connections would be, hello, brand director of brand X. I've been out and found a great startup. I'll introduce you two to work together. It's going to be great. I think you could both benefit. And because the brand person was so busy and didn't understand really the startup world, hadn't seen it like I had, I didn't have the time to really sell it in. Mm-hmm. I was there sometimes, but I didn't have the time to sell it in. It just didn't really work. I think what doing it on my own and what I learned from that, so when it came to working for myself, is this thing needs time. It needs me to really understand the startups, what they're doing, what their pain points are, what they are like as people, because that's actually more important than the tech sometimes. And then when I go to clients, get to know how open they are to meeting startups, what their kind of pain points are, what they are as people. So almost you're like, matchmaking is one way of describing it, but it's almost like you're trying to bring two different people together, sometimes with two different languages. Mm-hmm. To your point, two different views on what's ethical, what isn't, maybe, I don't know. And you're trying to make that first meeting work. Because the first one, if you can get it right in the first one, then it leads to other meetings. And then it leads to hopefully success in terms of pilots and work for both, or benefits for both. So it's more, I gave myself, be it put myself in a corner, I gave myself more time to work out how I'm going to ensure that these meetings, I gave them the best chance of working. And that needed time. That needed me putting myself out, talking to startups, finding out what I did, making a judgment call about them, meeting potential clients, trying to sell to them what I was doing. Because sometimes they say, oh, I don't want to talk to startups, I'm really busy. And trying to massage and facilitate that first meeting. So it was almost like a blind date. Mm-hmm. But I'm the only one who knows both sides.
And that there is therefore the requirement for the degree of preparation that you've described in order to facilitate a good first meeting, a good first impression, etc. Yeah.
And that would be down to me. So the thing is, if it doesn't go right and the startup feels that the corporate person hasn't given them the time they deserve, that's my fault. I'm the one who brought them along to this. If the corporate thinks the startup can't deliver on what they want and is pretty inept and isn't very good, then that goes down to me as well. So I'm the kind of the owner of it to a certain extent, and I'm the facilitator. So there was my reputation. So that's the only thing I had, was a reputation. So I have to be sure that the corporate understands, or their expectations are managed, and the startup's expectations are managed.
Mm-hmm.
And part
And
of that
then,
is
okay, yeah, and I was gonna, yeah, I'm gonna sort of fast move forward into this. So, at what point? So we're at 2014. You meant that you're, yeah, and then sort of how long are you on your own before Progressive is established?
I think it's about 3 years,
Okay,
and then
and what?
I do Matt.
Yeah, and what was it that, like, talk us through the decision making? I mean, I imagine that over those 3 years, obviously things are successful. You're building this network. You've already got a network, but you're continuing to develop that network, especially from the startup perspective. I imagine that that's beginning to develop and evolve. And then what is it that that in your thinking that says, look, I need to work with Matt on this, and I need to develop Progressive?
Well, I think in fairness, it was more Matt. I've known Matt for a long time. Matt was headed up an agency, one of the agencies that worked for AB InBev. So we'd met for AB InBev, but I'd known Matt for some time. And Matt just had some clients that he felt could benefit from this startup service I offered. Matt had already sold his agency a few years back, so he'd had an exit and he was looking for a new challenge. So he was doing some consultancy. So we thought we should join. So we joined. It's very, we informally done. We joined up, new name, new logo, the website, everything, and we just worked together on that. But quite, initially working together on certain clients. But as time went on, Matt was much more the strategy play, innovation strategy play. I was much more the maybe getting my hands dirty and getting the clients in front of startups. And sometimes we both work with the clients. Sometimes we had different projects. But it just gave me an opportunity, I think, one to scale in a way and progressive, because Matt brings clients into to my end, and we start joining them up with startups. I might have some clients who are intrigued by what Matt does. So it was all the synergies worked, and it helped us scale. And then we employed a couple of people full time. So we weren't huge, but we grew the business. That definitely enabled us to grow the business, and I think it just seemed the right thing. It wasn't anything I planned. Like most things, I think the opportunity came along, and you go by your gut, and it felt right to me. And obviously, it felt right for Matt because he suggested it. So we went ahead and did it. So it was quite. I look back now, it's the first time I thought about it. Really, I mean, it was quite smooth. It was a very smooth transition.
And out of interest, now thinking about, you've obviously developed over these sort of 10 years or so, this kind of the way of analyzing a possible startup that you might work with. And I imagine there's lots of criteria that go into that. As a result of you, I know you had started out on your own back in 2014, but let's focus in on the lessons of working with a small sort of team to develop and grow Progressive. What were the things that you learned about developing your own startup that sort of factored in or evolved your thinking or influenced your thinking in terms of how you go about analyzing or supporting the other startups that you worked with? Were there learnings through your own experiences, I suppose, my question?
Well, I carried over into Progressive, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, as a result of developing Progressive as your own startup, like what was surprising to you? What were learnings that occurred there?
I think things speeded up. I think the first thing is that with Progressive, because there was more customers coming in, I became busier, which was good. I think the criteria for there were more briefs, more startups to see. I knew more startups. So you were getting to that point a little bit where maybe I was at capacity with trying to join the two, and we end up getting a really still do a lovely lady called Sue, who's our researcher, who now helps out with a lot of the research we do looking for startups. So, but at that time, I think it was the speed. I think it opened up it opened my mind up, I think, to how we're going to scale things more and what criteria we need to assess startups. So it didn't change a lot, if I'm honest, but it makes you reassess it. I think we got more diverse briefs coming in. Before it was more marketing, but now that we're getting different briefs completely away from marketing. So my knowledge of startups had to expand. So I was talking to startups more about technologies and services out of my comfort zone. Whereas before, marketing, tech, MarTech, ad tech, whatever it's called now, I could get. But now I was learning about technologies that can tell if there's a leak in a water pipe before it starts, or technologies that help you recruit better, or technologies that help you run your finances better. I mean, so when I talk to founders, part of my job is to try and firstly understand what they do. And I think that became harder. So I think I became more skilled at picking up information, taking it, putting it together and working out what people are saying. And the more you do that, the quicker I found I became in it. So I'm pretty good at talking to someone, getting an idea of what they do, and having enough to carry the conversation on with them. And then the key thing is when you go back to the client and you might have to go through 20 or 30 startups, is being able to do a minute on each one. And that's the hardest thing. Taking what you've had from the founder, taking notes, putting the deck together to present to the client, but actually selling each of those technologies to the client, the corporate, for them to decide who they want to see. So that's the hardest thing. So you're almost becoming that founder times 30 for different things. And so you get quite good at that. And that's what, and eventually, and that's one thing definitely I think being a progressive did. It accelerated that development of consolidating lots of information, then selling it back to the client, and almost putting a different cap on or hat on for each founder I was talking about.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, as somebody developing their own startup, I mean, I struggle to convey what we're doing in a succinct and clear manner, and we're building one thing. To have 30 hats on is quite something. Ken, I want to, again, a classic me, I've absolutely blitzed through the 20 minutes that I have to talk about you and your background, but it'd be remiss of me not to touch upon the book, The Startup Lexicon. And can you just talk us through kind of when that idea sort of started growing and developing, and kind of, well, essentially just introducing kind of what you've written and why you've written it?
Yeah, so back in 2014, going back 10 years again, I went to some meetings with startups and on accelerators, and I was bamboozled by the talk. So-and-so's bootstrapping, so-and-so's got a burn rate of X, their run rate's this, their runway's this, they're going to get convertible notes, they're on a Series A, and I think, what is everyone talking about? I thought the corporate world had so many of these terms, like, ducks in a row, move the goalposts, all this singing from the same hymn sheet, whatever they are. I'm sure they still exist, but there are hundreds of them in the world of AB InBev, and generally in people's lives now, these words are business terms. The startup world's got even more. Now, I was a little bit, I keep saying I was a bit egotistical maybe, and I winged it, but I went away thinking I've got no idea what these people are talking about. Between certain sentences that made sense. And I had an idea, and that was it. I just got to know by Googling and kind of finding out. And then about 3 years later, or maybe a bit longer, so sometime later, this came up again. Someone mentioned about the language of startups. I think a friend said to me, yes, those guys or girls talk in their own language. I thought, yes, they do actually, because back in 2014, I experienced that. And I just thought, I woke up one day around a friend's house in, where was it, out in the West Country somewhere. And I just thought, there's an idea for a book. So I started writing down on a spreadsheet that Sunday morning. I don't know why I picked a spreadsheet. All these words that I remembered back in 2014. I got to about 30. And that week, every time I came across a word that I knew I wouldn't have known before I started on my own, I put it down. And I got to about 40 or 50 words. And I thought, definitely could do something on this. And then I think life got in the way. I think that was just after Progressive came together, and it got parked. That spreadsheet was in the cloud somewhere in a file. And then during COVID, Katie, my wife, mentioned to me one afternoon, whatever happened to that book idea? And I thought, well, it's in a file. So I looked at it and I thought, well, I don't know all the words that are out there. I would never say that I know every single word out there or understand every word out there. So if I'm going to do this book, I need someone to write it with me. One, because together I think I'd get most 80% of the words. And two, I need someone who's got the knowledge of some of those words more than I have, because if you're in the world of investment, you'll know certain words better than maybe I would. And also someone, if there's two of you, there's more chance you're going to get it done. Whereas if it's me, or you can put it off and it never happens. So Eamon Carey, who I've known him for years and years, he used to head up Techstars in the UK, very well known in the startup scene. He's now part of an investor fund. I phoned Eamon up. This was the first day when you could actually have a beer outside a pub. I think it was like July 21. I think it was 21. Maybe it wasn't 20. It might have been 20 actually. I lost track of the year. But 20. We met up for a coffee, not a beer. And I said, Eamon, I've got this idea. Do you fancy doing it? And Eamon said, yeah, let's do it. So we thought, right, let's do it. went to a small publisher, the White Book Company, which is fantastic, and we're off. And the first book came out back in 2022. So version 1, sorry, the purple top, came out in 22, and then Eamon and I wrote the updated version 2, the green top, just come out literally 2 weeks ago. So that came out start of August. So the reason for the book was that I felt that there's a lot of people out there who have got fantastic business ideas and they want to start their own business, or people who want to work with startups, be it corporates or universities or whatever it may be. And the first thing they're going to come across that's going to get in their way is the language. Mm-hmm. And language can be a massive can empower people, but also can be a huge barrier. And I think it's more of a barrier. So I felt I winged it. Maybe I was a bit cocky. I kind of winged it. But there'll be a lot of people who question themselves anyway, and sitting in a room with someone talking different terms you don't understand, that could be for them, I'm not going to go any further. I didn't think I was any good at this startup thing. I'm going to go back to the normal status quo. So I'm not saying the book is there to turn people into massive entrepreneurs. The book is there as a kind of a friend to help you get over some words at the first few stages. It's a primer. So it's got, I think it's about 270 words in it, definitions. We've got stories from experts, about 30, 40 or so experts. It's a primer. So if you were thinking of starting a business and you bought the book and you just skimmed it and read 10 words, those 10 words would make a huge difference to any conversation you go into, and someone might bring it up. You don't have to explain exactly what it means, but you think, yeah, I know what that's about. And that's the key thing.
Did you find, Kent, but by the way, that was brilliant. And we will at the end, obviously, share with listeners where they can go and buy both the first version and the second version. Absolutely no problem. Let me ask you, you obviously, before introducing the book, you alluded to the fact that, the skill that you developed was the ability to be able to speak to startup founders, understand what they were doing, and then essentially speak to the corporate clients and be able to present essentially within a succinct and clear fashion, like what the value was that the startup was able to provide. Did that experience of you being that kind of interpreter in many ways, did that factor into, and was that manifested within the book itself?
In how we helped me put it together, you mean?
Yeah, in terms of the experiences that you'd had of doing that degree of sort of translation, if you like.
It most likely did. Maybe subconsciously. I think the thing with definitions is every definition in the book, we didn't just Google it, find a definition and use it, because you'd have to ask permission or you have to source it. And we wanted to, if you Google any word now, if you Google accelerator, you'll get 10 different versions of what it is. And you may go away thinking, I don't get it. So what we try to do is look at what everyone's saying accelerators are out there and create a new definition, which maybe brings together the good bits of 2 or 3 definitions. But it's that kind of the first experience of the word accelerator. Hopefully our definition, if it's your first experience, it will give you an idea of roughly what it is. And that's what it was. So it was an ability of, as you say, taking bits and forming something from lots of sources of information. So maybe subconsciously, first time I thought that maybe it did help, but I did find that very difficult. So we had a Google Doc sheet, Eamon and I, and we'd go back to it and we'd update certain definitions that we gave out to each other to look into. And I found that quite difficult, just pulling together words and trying to be a bit of a wordsmith and creating definitions. Some were quite easy, but some of them were quite tough. So yes, maybe I was better at it than I would have been if I hadn't jumped the corporate ship with my old AB InBev brain, but I still found it quite tough. I was glad when we got to the point where the definitions were signed off, and the tone of voice was approved and everything by the publisher, and that's quite tough. And then we got we got in-market experts to do their take on certain words, which was not easy, but that was getting people we know to come in and do 200, 300 words around a certain definition. But that's them doing the work. But I think the definition writing I found quite tough.
Right.
But it was good. It was really enjoyable. It was if it was a full-time job, I think I'd have gone mad. But because it was a side hustle, it was quite a nice break from the normal stuff I was doing during the week.
Super interesting. Well, I feel like we could have a completely other show, Ken, on the side hustle of writing your own book, which I know you and I have spoken about previously. As I said, we've done the classic thing that I do where we haven't got on to talk about the article that we shared with you. Would you mind possibly, Ken, just briefly describing for our listeners the article? I think it was in the Harvard Business Review by David Lansfield.
Yes.
Great to hear.
So this was an article David Lansfield wrote in the Harvard Business Review called "How to Communicate Your Company's Strategy Effectively." First of all, very easy article to read. I'd recommend anyone reading. It's not one of those War and Peace ones where halfway through you forget what the title was. So what David went into to kind of give you a very quick overview is, if you are heading a big business and you want to put across a new strategy, how best do you communicate that to the wider audience and the teams, departments, regions, whatever? And there's loads of, and he breaks it down into different areas, like, you know, how you communicate comprehensively, things you should do. The ones, and I could read the article, but I'd advise people should read it themselves. Bits that came out to me were, there's the first section about communicating comprehensively, and in other words, doing it properly. And I think he came out with some tips. So his view was, you know, to communicate comprehensively, you'll need to, and he listed some things. And some of those resonate with me, you know. For example, one thing he says is, you know, you've got to visualize your ambition. So it's actually, when you start talking about it to the audience, be it face to face, via, you know, web or whatever it may be, Teams, Zoom, whatever, you've got to spark imagination, build excitement for a better future. And that is key, you know. So first of all, it's just like when you're pitching as a startup, you know, you've got to sell the vision. You've got to get people intrigued, excited. And if your first slide on your pitch deck, or your first paragraph when you're talking to the bigger corporate global machine, is a bit kind of dull and, oh, hi, we've got this new thing, then it's not going to work. So you've got to not only sell the vision, but do it in a way where I think it, and this is a difficult bit, actually makes it exciting to everyone. And that's the key bit, because it's the language you use, and it's not easy. And I wouldn't say I could do it, but if you make it too management talk, people of certain levels will go, oh, I don't know what these guys are talking about. And if you make it too vague and open and whatever, you know, generally, not just the vision bit, but generally, then other people will check out and think, has it been thought through? So it's a really difficult one. So, but the point is visualizing it. And then he goes into things like, you know, you've got to challenge the status quo to get people to kind of see that there is a better way than what they do at the moment, because people are stuck in their ways. And then the other bit that was quite interesting was about making it personal. So it's got to resonate with people, which I was kind of saying before. And there's other little bits as well, but I think the interesting bit that I got from the article per se was, and I fully agree with David's view, that a lot of companies just see the communication part as an afterthought, and it's a tick box exercise, and it's done. Right, we know what we're doing. Everyone's got it now on that newsletter or that email, which goes on for 6 days if you read it, or these load of video recordings we've done, and it stops there, done. Everyone knows it, and I think that's the key thing. Is, you know, if a business leader got this article and broke it all down and applied it, they would realize that one call, one video, one newsletter isn't enough. It's an ongoing thing. It's almost like a campaign, and you've got to be very careful that, you know, there might be different messages for different people. You just got to do it properly. And you've got to be comprehensive with it, and you've got to think about the audience more, which sounds so obvious, but I've been there, with all due respect, AB InBev days and other days where it is, you can feel it's a tick box exercise.
What did you, Ken? That was brilliant, by the way, in terms of the summary of the article. And as I say, anybody that wants to sort of investigate kind of communication of strategy at a corporate level, I think it is a really interesting article to kind of dive into. I want to, though, because I've got you, I want to sort of shine the focus a little bit back onto startup and the experience of coming from your corporate background and then beginning to engage with startups. What were the main differences that you saw or appreciated in the communication styles or the communication preferences? And obviously, this is a very much a generalized question, but what were the differences, or what were the things that you really observed in terms of the use of language and the ability to be able to communicate between those two experiences that you'd had?
I don't know this scientifically, but I would say by the near, and again, this is a really good question. First time I thought of this is, the corporate world generally moves at a certain pace. And it's not a fault. It's just because if a company is so big, you've got more people to involve, you've got bigger stakes. So you have processes, you have things in place to make sure that you make the best decision and things are done in the right way. So you move at a slower pace. I think somewhere down the line, there's definitely a correlation between that and the amount of words that corporates use. I do honestly think that. If you go into the startup world where things are moving really quickly, sometimes too quickly, so it's not the perfect way. It's not like startups are amazing, they go really quick. Sometimes it's not a good thing to be quick, but because they are moving at a faster pace and their brain, in a way, is going, seeing the future approaching much quicker, I think it's much more sharper conversation. So the actual language, number of words, I think it declines. I also think that in terms of the messaging, okay, they've got smaller teams, but it's much more succinct generally and to the point. Because a lot of founders have never been in the corporate world, so that's all they know. And it's much more quick to the point, and you kind of, it doesn't mean they cover things perfectly. It doesn't mean they communicate as 100% perfect, but I think they get to the point more.
And out of interest, Ken, on that, I'm really intrigued. So you've spoken before about, obviously, I know you do mentoring of startups now, and but obviously with the roles that you've done at Progressive, etc. Alluding to those as well. When it comes to language that you've helped develop for a startup in terms of the way that they go about then communicating with the prospective client, corporate organization, like, you mentioned the sharpness, if you like, perhaps not the completeness, but the sharpness of the language that's used within the startup context. Can you just talk us through, like, do you work on like an interpretation or an evolution of the language that will then fit with a corporate client? Like, how do you get both talking the same language? I suppose is my question.
Yeah. So that is the key. So the key is that to a certain extent, both sides speak slightly different languages, but as importantly, both sides have different expectations of that first meeting. And what I mean by that is, let's be a hypothetical situation. A startup is going to come and present to a corporate client. They're going to pitch for business. So there is a budget on the table, there's a brief on the table, and there's 5 startups coming in that I would facilitate, and they have half an hour with the clients, 3 or 4 clients sitting opposite, like judge and jury sitting there. The startup has 30 minutes. They say have 10 minutes to pitch and 20 minutes for questions. So I will help that startup. I won't write the deck for them. It's their company. But if they so wish, and usually I just say, send it to me the night before, I will have a quick look at their deck. The language, my view is on that deck, and people write books on pitch decks, so I'm not saying the way I say do it is the way, is I just generally say you've got to keep it quite succinct. And not only succinct in the language, but not many slides. So in whatever order, I would say, if one slide has what your problem is you're addressing, the next slide has how you address that, what your solution is, what your service is. The next one is what makes you different. And then we might have another one then on how a pilot could look, or how you address the brief, or whatever it may be. But I would keep it to 5 or 6 slides, and don't have War and Peace on each slide. Now, some startups are very good at that. Back to my earlier point, they will come in and they will be able to use the slides as a guide, but they will be able to sell it with a few more words verbally. Mm-hmm. Some startups, ironically, what I said before, will move very quickly in their day-to-day life, but when they come in front of a corporate, will over-talk, and their slides will be really heavy, and they have too many slides, ironically. So it's almost like, without realizing it, they're adapting to the heavy talk of the corporates without realizing it. And that's only, that may not be scientifically true, but it feels a bit like that sometimes. The key thing is, and I say this again and again and again, of all the pitches I've seen and been facilitating, if there's 5 startups, say, pitching for one bit of business, there's usually 1 or 2 in there that I think their tech should get it. If they stick to a safe presentation, they will get the gig. They will get the work. 9 out of 10 times they don't. And the main reason why people who should get the work or win that pitch don't get the pitch is because they over pitch. So they over. So if going back to my scenario, if you have 10 minutes to pitch and 20 minutes for questions, a lot of startups, even though they're quite like that in their day job, bang, 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 when it comes to pitching, they're comfortable. They've done it before, and they get a little bit laid back, and they talk about things, and they talk about the team and the story, and they're really comfortable, and they're talking about their business, and they forget time. Mm-hmm. And they go 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Now, when it comes to the questions at the end, the corporate will have 10 minutes to ask questions. The pitch before, they may have had 20 minutes. So already they think this person hasn't kept time, so are they reliable? And they haven't got time to get all their questions out. And being very British, at the end of it, the corporate will say, "Thank you very much, Julie. That was an amazing presentation. Love the tech. Thanks for coming. We'll be in touch." Julie leaves, and I escort Julie to the lift to go out to her day, rest of her day, and she will go, "That was fantastic." I say, "Well, you overpitched. I think you went really well." I go back to the corporate, and the corporate will say, "Yeah, really good. Didn't keep to time. If she can't keep to time now, what's she going to be like if we got deadlines working with her? Next one, gone." By the time Julie or John or Jack get out into the high street, they've lost. They will go out thinking, "That went well. I talked and they loved it. And I was talking about my journey and everything," all stuff they didn't need to talk about. So even though I think startups are much more succinct and to the point, the irony is that the reason a lot of them don't get the work they should do is because they almost adopt a corporate word way of lots of words and overpitch. It's my biggest
And Ken, that's super interesting. And I mean, I think we spoke before about our audience of the Responsible Edge. We do have a lot of kind of purpose-driven startup founders that are kind of part of our audience, and we interestingly have a lot of kind of C-level executives who are our other kind of side of our audience. So I think that's really interesting in terms of providing practical insight, if you like, for the startup founders that we have listening in. I think what's really interesting, what you've described there as well, is coming back to the article. You can see that's so applicable within the notion of corporate strategic communications as well, because what you have is a situation whereby if you over pitch essentially the strategy, then people have got their own things going on within their roles, within, you know, as a perhaps an employee, etc. They're not going to engage with this. The thing that you're looking for, and I'm sorry, I'm putting words in your mouth here, but surely the thing that you're looking for is you're looking for engagement from your employees. You're looking for questions, confirmations, what does this mean to me, etc., which a shorter, briefer pitch of what your strategic goals and objectives are is likely to facilitate. Is that a fair analogy?
You're right. I think there's two things. One is, just breaking it down, is when you pitch to a corporate, that's a formal process. Hi everyone, I'm off. Bang. When you have that Q&A after the pitch, that's informal. And that's where I say, if you do a good pitch, but you answer the questions badly, you'll lose. If you do an average pitch, but you do a good Q&A, you could win the business. So the Q&A, even though people put all the stuff on the pitch, the Q&A is where you really hit or you don't. So if you do your pitch and then someone asks you a question and you say, "Oh, honestly, I don't know the answer to that," or you answer it with authenticity and credibility, people will warm to you because they think, "Do I want to?" I've seen their pitch and it might be very similar to the pitch before, but I like the way they are. I like the way they answer the question. They're honest. I feel like I can work with these people. I've got their attention. They respect me. I respect them. So the Q&A, sometimes which startups think I can just wing. I just talk about whatever. Is so important. That's one point. The other point is, to your point about, you know, engaging with people, and it's not just a one-off thing. Is I always say to startups, you're not going to win that business on that one day. So when you go in for those 30 minutes, a lot of startups think this is the game-changing day. But any meeting you have, and I say the same here, what I'm doing now when we talk to potential clients, is the first meeting really is only to get them intrigued, to get stuff across, to build a relationship. And it's the second, third, fourth, fifth meeting where you may get some work. So for a startup, yes, it's important you pitch. Yes, it's absolutely important your Q&A is bang on and you do a good job. But your goal really is to get another meeting with the corporate where they might say, "We're intrigued by what you do. We want to talk about the brief in a bit more detail." Then you can change your tone and language. So, and it's the same with corporate communications. One webinar, one presentation, one newsletter is not going to do the job, I would argue. If you have follow-up meetings, that's the thing is you spark their imagination, as it said in the article, with the vision and everything. But you're going to need to have follow-up discussions in bigger, smaller, mixed groups where you kind of bring it a bit more to life to them. And it might be another meeting after that where you have a catch-up 2 weeks later. How's it going? What's working? What isn't? It's a lot of work, you know. And I know people who deal with internal comms and everything. It's a full-time job, but it isn't just a tick box. Just like going and pitching isn't just bang, right, I'm going to find out now. It takes time, and you've got to it's start of a process.
Yeah, and I know we're trying to draw analogies from between the two, but it's all about building relationship. Ultimately, it's about it not being a one-way transactional engagement. It's about dialogue, relationship, embedding the things within our thinking.
The funny thing is, I always say I say to corporates, a lot of corporates will still think that a startup is an acne-ridden 18-year-old coding in a bedroom. They still. So when they meet a startup, who could be my age, your age, younger, whatever, some have got some really good corporate experience. They're usually like, wow, this is really good. Well, that's a really good piece of tech. That's really clever. And they know they've got this experience. Their co-founder worked there. Oh, this is really good. This isn't some young dude who's walked in. This is really cool. This is really comprehensive. So the expectations the corporates have is sometimes misaligned. It's not correct. And startups sometimes will go in and think, oh my God, this is Procter and Gamble. This is a huge company, and they're in awe of the building. And by the time they come to pitch, it's like I'm pitching to God. So, and then they realise that the people who are there from the corporate world hopefully are normal people. They've got their own pressures. They might even have lots in common: music, interests, whatever. And I always say to corporates, give it a go, see what the startups are like. You'll be surprised. And I always say to startups, you're not working with Procter and Gamble, really. You're working with 2 or 3 people who are part of a massive company called Procter and Gamble. And your success or failure will have nothing to do with all those logos of Procter and Gamble and all the brands they've got. It's how you get on with 2 or 3 people. And I think, and it helps startups because it is quite daunting when you have a piece of technology and you go into a huge company, and sometimes corporate people will have a little bit of a swagger, You've got to see their people. And, I work, for big companies, Procter and Gamble being one, and we generally only work with 3 or 4 people in that company. So it's really a small team. I have a small team, they have a small team. We work together on a project. Yes, they work for a big company, but at the end of the day, my interactions is usually with a small team.
Mm-hmm.
So
super. And the implications on language are that you need to take that moment within that startup sort of pitching context to just breathe and just realize that you are in front of people here, and that the amount that you're about to share within your pitch itself and the use of language needs to be human. It needs to be engaging at a human level.
Yeah, I think definitely language is important. I think startups need to realize that some of the language they use, most of which is in the book, not everyone knows in the corporate world. And sometimes the safety zone is to go into terminology. It's instinctive. Our MVP is this, and they don't realize that not everyone lives in their world. So the corporate might be sitting there thinking, what are they talking about? Kind of thing, and it doesn't help. And corporates can be the same. They will come out with their own terminology, abbreviations that they have, and the startup thinks, so what is that? So you've got to be careful, but it's not a deal breaker. It's just life. We all have certain tweaks to the day-to-day language we use. I think the ethical side is quite interesting, because as the relationship builds, and I always say, let's say you do the pitch and you get the business and you're now working with a large company. I always say to both sides, from the corporate side, just have an appreciation of how big this work is to the startup. So if they're sometimes over keen or things are slowing up a little bit and you're not giving it attention, this isn't just something that can get crossed off a spreadsheet. This is their business, and this is something that if it was to go wrong or not work out as they hoped, then it's a big deal for them financially, everything. Yeah. And for the startup, appreciate that you are not the most important thing to the corporate. So what I mean by that is, just because your tech's great and they're working with you, they have other pressures as well. I know from my own days in the corporate world, they might have a boss breathing down their neck. They may have a campaign that's not going right. They may have a team member that's causing problems. So your pilot is not top of the list and nowhere near top of the list. So if they're a little bit late, the corporate getting back, yes, they've got to show some consideration, try and be on time with the startup, and we try and help both. But just appreciate that they're in demand a lot. So have some empathy. So I say both sides have to have a bit of ethical empathy with each other, because they both live in different worlds and they're working on the same project, but it means different things to them.
Well, Ken, that has been incredibly helpful. I mean, even I feel like we've just recorded a consultancy session for us to be thinking about exactly how we go about communicating what we're doing. So that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. We've blitzed through the kind of recording time that we typically have. As you know, we always kind of finish the show with the magic wand question. So I'm going to ask it of you. If we were to hand you that magic wand, Ken, and you could change one thing about the corporate world this instant, what would that one thing be?
I would say the one thing about the corporate world is go out. If you just get out there and meet some startups, and that doesn't have to be around a brief. Just go to some events, meet some startups. Don't read blogs and everything, but go out and meet some startups. Go to some startup related events, and I promise you will be pleasantly surprised about the nature, the ability, the quality that is out there. And I think it's very easy to sit back behind a Zoom call and everything and talk to people or hear about things, but go out and meet some startups. I said I had one magic one moment is every corporate has to go out next week and go to a startup event, a demo day, a pitch event, or just meet a couple of startups and have a chat with them. I think it would be beneficial in many, many ways.
And just on that, in the sense that the corporate world could adapt and to evolve more quickly, should they realize that there's these opportunities to align themselves with these startups that are out there doing brilliant work?
I think there's a thing, and it's mentioned in David's piece about people get stuck in the status quo a little bit. I think in the corporate world, you think everything you need to know, you know. When you go and meet some startups, even if the tech isn't quite relevant, but it could be relevant-ish, but you get it, there's a part of your brain that thinks, oh, that's interesting. I didn't even know that was possible. So even if a corporate works in the beer market, but went to a health tech demo day, I would still say you would come away and you wouldn't say, what a waste of time, nothing to do with beer. You'd come away going, do you know what I saw today? This is that. And I met this person. That's fascinating. I didn't even know you could do that. And I bet you any money you like, when they're down the pub or out at an evening meal with friends and family that weekend, that would come up because they would say, I was at an event the other day. I didn't want to go to it. And I met this health tech that does this. Did you know 6 out of 7 people do this and this can help here? I didn't even know that was possible. I just think it opens the mind because you are stuck in blinkers with, I'm exaggerating to prove a point, but if it's a danger in the corporate, you're stuck in blinkers right through to retirement. You go out to see startups and you think, I didn't even know that was possible. And you meet these people rather than just reading stuff all the time.
To bring it full circle, you're back on the motorway of the corporate world, and perhaps not driving off and exploring all the wonderful things going on in the walled gardens. As you segue off. Ken, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. That was a really, really at times practical. I think there's a lots of practical insight there for any startup founders specifically, and some really, really interesting things to get our teeth into from a strategic perspective. So thank you very much for sharing that with us today.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.